It's feeding time at the Liberty Sanctuary.
Sometimes I don't know where to find all this food. Sometimes in the evening I pray, what shall I give tomorrow?
Welcome to Hokkaido.
Thank you. This looks incredible. I had no idea they were so big. So this behind us is what this is going to become.
Yes, it's like the most exciting festival that happens in this region.
Here in the Maldives, sandbanks like this appear and disappear. They constantly change size and shape according to the seasons and the ocean's forces. And that really influences the way that the people live and adapt.
Inspiring travel. Watch now on iPlayer.
Thelma Schoonmaker, Noel Rogers, Salman Rushdie, welcome to This Cultural Life. Some of the world's leading artistic figures reveal to me their influences.
This is what we call fiction. You start from a real source and you reimagine it.
And the experiences that have inspired their own work.
Being an editor is one of the most creative jobs you could ever have in the world.
For a fascinating insight into what fires the creative imagination, join me, John Wilson, for This Cultural Life. Watch on iPlayer.
Ready for a lively debate? Sometimes our panelists agree, and sometimes they don't. There's people with a lot to say, and others who just say enough. Some who want to ask the hard questions, some who want to avoid them, and some who think they have the answers. They're guaranteed to keep you entertained, whether you agree or not. Politics Live, tomorrow at 12:15 on BBC Two and iPlayer.
Live from London, this is BBC News. The UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves sets out her new plan for spending with a promise to invest in security, health and growing the economy.
In this spending review, total departmental budgets will grow by 2.3% a year in real terms. Compare that to the Conservative choice of austerity.
I'm Regina Vaidyanathan, live in Westminster. We'll be getting all of the political reaction to the Chancellor's plans, including speaking to the Shadow Chancellor in the next few minutes.
Leaders in Northern Ireland call for peace as 17 officers are injured in a second night of clashes in Ballymena, sparked by the alleged sexual assault of a teenage girl. Los Angeles emerges from a curfew as the US military prepares its response to immigration protests. We're standing by for an update from the National Guard. And in breaking news, the EU and UK agree a deal on the post-Brexit future of Gibraltar. We'll have more on that story for you. Hello, I'm Anita McVeigh and you are watching Verified Live. It's a hugely significant day here in the UK as the Chancellor has set out how taxpayers' money will be spent by the government until the end of the decade. We'll have lots of analysis, so let's cross straight to my colleague, Regina Vaidyanathan, who's in Westminster for us. Regina.
Yeah, it's been a busy day here in Westminster. As you say, the UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves setting out her spending plans for the coming years. Now, it's important to say that this was not a budget, so there were no tax announcements or anything like that. This is all about allocating money that's already in the system. Now, there have been some winners and losers when it comes to different government departments as she set out those plans for the next decade. So let's get some of the headlines on this. The Chancellor confirmed total departmental spending will grow by 2.3% over inflation per year. Now, the NHS came out as a big winner today. The Chancellor saying that spending on the NHS will rise by 3% a year after inflation. She also confirmed £39 billion for social and affordable housing. Now, we heard a little bit about this in recent weeks, but the Chancellor also committed to a boost in defence spending. She also said she wanted to end asylum hotels in the next 4 years. Well, Rachel Reeves said she was rejecting austerity, which we saw under the Conservative government. Well, our political correspondent Layla Nathu sets out what we heard.
When will we feel better off, Chancellor?
Soon, fingers crossed, is what she's thinking. Rachel Reeves leaving Downing Street this morning for Parliament for a crucial moment in her time in charge of the country's finances.
Yes, see you later.
Earlier, cabinet ministers met to hear how much money their departments have been allocated for the coming years, both for spending and investment. Some have done better than others. Trade-offs unavoidable with limited room for manoeuvre in economic terms.
I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves.
In the Commons this lunchtime, the Chancellor set out her stall.
We are renewing Britain. But I know that too many people in too many parts of our country are yet to feel it. This government's task, my task as Chancellor, and the purpose of this spending review is to change that, to ensure that renewal is felt in people's everyday lives, in their jobs and on their high streets. The priorities of this spending review are the priorities of working people.
She's giving day-to-day spending across all departments an above-inflation boost and said she was taking a different approach to that of the Tories.
In contrast to our increase of 2.3%, they cut spending by 2.9% per year in 2010. So let's be clear. Austerity was a destructive choice for the fabric of our society.
There are cuts to some departments, including Transport and the Foreign Office, but schools and defence have been given an uplift, and the NHS was the big winner.
This Labour government is making a record cash investment in our National Health Service, increasing real terms day-to-day spending by 3% per year for every single year of this spending review. An extra £29 billion per year for the day-to-day running of our health service.
The Chancellor also set out areas for longer-term investment, around £14 billion to build the Sizewell C nuclear power station in Suffolk, more than £15 billion on bus, tram and train networks in the north of England and the Midlands, £86 billion for research in the science and technology sector by the end of the Parliament, and £39 billion towards affordable homes in England.
The Chancellor is betting that voters and those within her own party who've recently questioned her judgment will be convinced by big numbers on investing for the longer term in the hope of generating growth over time. There is more spending money in some priority areas, but these are a delicate set of decisions that Rachel Reeves knows will define what this Labour government can do.
Opposition parties gave their response to the Chancellor's announcement.
This is the spend now, tax later review. Because the Right Honourable Lady knows she will need to come back here in the autumn with yet more taxes. And a cruel summer of speculation awaits.
We are still not seeing the scale of ambition needed to turn the country around. We welcome the announcement of investment in the NHS, but on its own, it won't work unless the government invests in social care too.
Rachel Reeves and her Treasury team are telling us what the state will provide under Labour and how much that will cost. Big choices that they say marks a new phase of this government. Leila Nathu, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, we saw the Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride in that report from Leila Nathu, and he joins me now here on College Green. Welcome to our coverage, Mr. Stride. If I ask you this question first, if the Conservatives were to win the next general election, how much of this spending review would you continue with?
Well, it's a long way away, the next election. It's about 4.5 years away, so we'll clearly have a clear set of manifesto commitments at that point. But look, we would not have done what this government has done, which is to come into office, load up taxes on businesses, destroy growth.
This isn't about taxation today, though, is it, Mr. Stride? For example, let's break it down. Would you continue with that commitment for spending on the NHS?
So we would not have started where we are at the moment. It's like asking me if somebody had crashed a car into the wall at 100 miles an hour and handing me the steering wheel and saying, well, what do you do now? We would not have started from that point.
But so it's not, is it? I'm just asking you quite simply, would you continue with some of those promises
we're not
on
in
NHS
government.
and
We
defence?
haven't created this mess, so we're not in a position to write a budget, for example, for 4 years' time. But the point that I'm making is the reason why a lot of people are very concerned about what's going to happen in the autumn, when a lot of people are now expecting taxes to be raised, is because of the mismanagement of the economy. And that comes down to the tax decisions that were taken when Labour were elected, the taxing and spending splurge that they embarked upon that drove up inflation, kept interest rates higher for longer, and they're mounding up the debts now in a fiscally irresponsible way. And the debt servicing costs alone are running at £100 billion a year. That's twice what we spend on defence.
With respect, Mr Stride, many would argue that previous Conservative governments, particularly what we saw under Liz Truss, caused a lot of the economic problems that the British economy is in now.
On the day of the last election, we had the fastest growing economy in the G7. We had near record levels of employment, near record low levels of unemployment. We had inflation down to bang on target at 2% on the day of the election. It's almost double that now under this government. So I'm afraid I don't think there is some kind of equality of what's happened when we were in office and what we've seen under this Labour government.
I mean, we just heard from the Chancellor saying that austerity was a destructive choice. I was looking at some IFS analysis of austerity under the Conservatives, talking about growth not being as strong as it could have been, and the Chancellor saying there was a lost decade of growth. So what would you say to that then?
Well, if you're referring to when we came in 2010, people forget that our inheritance from the then Labour government under Gordon Brown was one of the largest deficits in many years. It was running at over 10% of the size of the economy. And of course, in order to get that down, because by definition the deficit adds to the debt, we were adding to debt in the meantime. But by the time the pandemic came around, we had actually got into a current budget surplus. Okay, so that was the achievement we had made. We then had COVID, then had a war in Ukraine, we had to get inflation down, we had to support jobs through furlough and so on. And of course that meant that we had to spend money in order to do that.
So we can argue, not you and I, but everyone can argue about, you know, when the economy was better or not. But we're talking about going forward now, Mr Stride. And one thing some people have been asking is, what is Baidenomics? What is the Conservative economic policy under Kemi Badenoch? And I've asked you, would you continue with the growth in NHS funding and defence? And you're not willing to commit to that right now.
So when you say an economic policy, I think you have to look at the overarching objectives, and that has to be to get growth up and productivity up in our country. That is a complicated thing to work out how to radically rewire an economy to do that.
It is, but some people say that includes higher spending, some people say austerity. So just to get an idea of the ideology of where
I was about to do that,
please
and
continue.
let me explain. Okay, so first of all, we have to look at taxation. The tax burden is far too high. We need to get that down and simplify taxes. Secondly, we need to look at the size of the state. Before the pandemic, we had 365,000 civil servants. We now have 515,000. That speaks to the bloated nature of the state. We have to look at skills, we have to look at net migration, we have to look at the higher education offer, we have to look at controlling welfare spending, we have to look at supply side issues like building houses, roads, rail, reservoirs, and we have to look at getting our industrial electricity costs down, because we're paying 7 times what they do in China, 4 times what they do in the United States and Canada, and many other things beside. And that is why Kemi is absolutely right to be spending the time now to do that thoughtful, deep thinking to come up with the answers to those challenges so we can have a much more radically and rapidly growing economy.
OK, watch this space then. Thank you very much. Mel Stride, Shadow Chancellor there. Well, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, said she's made tough decisions on how much government departments can spend on public services. Well, BBC Verify's Ben Chu has been taking a closer look at who the winners are and who the losers are.
Who are the departmental winners and losers from the government's spending review? Let's go through the winners first. This shows the average real growth rate in day-to-day spending for each department in the 3 years to 2028-29. That's the period in which money has been allocated in this spending review. Health and social care, as expected, is a relative winner, with spending going up by 2.8% per year. Education rises by 0.7% per year. Defence, again, as expected, also gets 0.7% per year, part of that pledge to get spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2027, although most of its spending uplift is from investment in defence kit, which isn't part of these figures. Justice, which covers courts and prisons, is at 1.8%, which will be a relief for a department which was not previously protected. But because health and defence are both big spending departments, if they get a rise, others inevitably get less, given the limited size of the pot. So let's look at some of those who have lost out. First, environment gets a 2.7% a year cut, and transport gets a 5% a year cut. MHCLG, the Housing, Communities and Local Government Department, that's Angela Rayner's department, gets a 1.4% a year cut. Now, to be clear, this is showing budgets for the day-to-day running costs of these departments. Some who list here will be doing better when it comes to their allocated capital infrastructure budgets. For instance, Angela Rayner will have more to spend on social housing, yet, as expected, some tough choices have been made on day-to-day spending. Choices which tell us something important about this government's priorities.
Ben Chew there. We go from one Ben to another. I'm joined now to get more political reaction to the Chancellor's announcements by Ben Lake, who's the Plaid Cymru MP for Ceredigion Preseli. Did I say that right?
Perfectly. Thank you for
wonderful.
having me.
I always worry, especially with my surname. I should make sure I get names right. What's Plaid's reaction?
Well, disappointment, really. We were, much of the talk in Wales leading up to this spending review was about investment in rail infrastructure.
You got that, though?
Well, unfortunately, nothing near enough of what we were promised, and indeed what the Labour government had actually led us to believe that we would receive. So, for example, the Welsh government a few years ago made an assessment saying that Wales had been underfunded in rail to the tune of between 2.9 and 8 billion pounds. What we've had today is 445 million over 10 years. And without wanting to be a pedant, it's very easy to make promises in 10 years. There's an election before that.
The Chancellor saying, though, that the £1.6 billion spend on Wales is actually 20% more than people in other parts of the UK are getting. So actually she's arguing that Wales is doing quite well.
Well, I think one of the things she said was that it was a record-breaking settlement, and I would just politely say that it's always the case. If inflation means that settlements should go up every year. The fact of the matter is this is a process through the Barnett formula. It's a mathematical inevitability that any increase in funding on reserved matters in England triggers a payment for Wales. At the end of the day, these are things that have been driven not by the specific needs of the people of Wales, but a mathematical formula.
But Ben, she's saying 22.4 billion each year for the Welsh Government. She's saying that that's a decent amount of money, relatively speaking.
When you consider some of the big problems we have in Wales, an older population, sadly a sicker population as well, the demands on many of our public services are relatively higher than other parts of the UK. So I think it's not really helpful to discuss about absolute numbers. We should be looking at what is actually needed, and does then the budget allocated towards that service actually meet the need.
OK, the bells of Big Ben end this interview. Thank you very much, Ben Lake from Plaid Cymru. Well, that's it for the moment. There's plenty more on the BBC News website, plenty of explainers and analysis, loads more coverage from the spending review. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
Now, the British government and the European Union have reached a deal over the future status of Gibraltar. News coming into us in just the last few minutes about this. The UK says the deal will avoid the need for checks on people and goods moving between Gibraltar and Spain. As a British overseas territory with a land border with the EU, Gibraltar's status has been left effectively unresolved since Brexit. Well, let's speak to our political correspondent, Damien Grammaticus, for more on this. Damien, hello to you. Yes, these talks have been ongoing since 2020, haven't they, since Britain left the EU. So what more detail do we know about the outcome?
Yes, exactly. So what happened back in the Brexit time was that the UK left. Gibraltar, as a British territory, also left the EU, and the status was sort of left as was. So both UK and Spain claiming sovereignty. But the key issue really has been how the border should operate, how Gibraltar should interact with Spain, because it has a land border and thousands of people cross back and forth for work every day, goods and the like, and it's vital for both the security or the economy of Gibraltar and for that southern portion of Spain. So what has happened today is that after years of negotiations, which set out a broad sort of outline, the UK government and the EU have agreed a political agreement. So this isn't the final nuts and bolts, but it is the outline of it, and that is an agreement which will mean, and I can tell you in the words of the EU, all physical barriers be removed, checks and controls on persons and goods gone, circulating between Spain and Gibraltar. What that does basically means that on the land border between the two, they're going to remove the checks, but it does necessitate that so Gibraltar's airport and port will effectively be an EU external border then. So the UK side are making clear that Spanish officials will be stationed at Gibraltar's port and airport. Gibraltar officials will check people on arrival. The Spanish officials will also check them to check and see whether people have the rights to enter into and circulate within the EU's Schengen free movement zone. And that's the kind of compromise they have come up with. It's been welcomed by the UK government, who said that the Gibraltar's status and its future were uncertain because this had been left over from Brexit. Welcomed too by the Gibraltar First Minister, Chief Minister, who's been involved in all these negotiations because of what it does for just securing Gibraltar's economic outlook.
So, Damien, as we mentioned, these talks continuing since 2020, now almost at a resolution. Do you see this very much as part of the new climate that we've been witnessing between the Labour government and the EU to try to, deal with some more practical elements of the ongoing relationship?
I think certainly yes. And what we have seen exactly is just in the last few weeks, the UK-EU summit, where they agreed, the first summit since Brexit, the two sides sat down and agreed this what they called was a new partnership going forwards and more cooperation in various areas. And as they were negotiating that, the Spanish side, the Spanish foreign minister had said and pointed to the issue of Gibraltar, saying that also needed to be resolved or dealt with in order for the UK to have full relations with the EU. Now, Spain had retained, since Brexit, a veto over the terms of any deal. So what we see here, a loose end from Brexit, alongside that new partnership, that's been being tied up. What underlying this, though, what we do have is both sides still maintaining their respective claims on sovereignty, and they're both saying this deal does nothing to change that. The basic situation remains that Spain claims sovereignty, but Gibraltar, the UK, will not relinquish that unless Gibraltar's people decide to themselves and say it is a decision for Gibraltar. So that fundamental position doesn't change, but it probably will bring criticism from some in the UK for allowing Spanish border authorities to operate within Gibraltar.
OK, Damien, thank you very much for that. Damien Grammaticus. More breaking news now from Poland, where the pro-EU government has won a vote of confidence in Parliament. It was called by the Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, after an opposition nationalist candidate was elected as president. Let me just give you the results of that. 243 votes supporting the government, 210 against, with no abstentions. Well, Donald Tusk called that vote immediately after the victory of Karol Nawrocki. While his role is largely ceremonial, he has the power to veto legislation, something that has hindered Mr. Tusk's ability to deliver on many campaign promises with the current president. So Mr. Tusk called that confidence vote because he said it was to demonstrate that the government still has majority support, even after in its view, suffering that blow in the presidential election when its candidate lost. We'll bring you more on the implications of that. Now, ministers are calling for calm after a second night of violent protests in Ballymena in County Antrim following a protest over an alleged sexual assault. More than 30 police officers have been injured during the unrest and a number of people have been arrested on suspicion of riotous behaviour. Petrol bombs and bricks were thrown at police during the disturbances, with officers firing plastic baton rounds in response. Our Ireland correspondent Chris Page sent us this report from Ballymena.
Burning cars, chaotic streets and attacks on homes for a second night in a row. In this part of Ballymena, a crowd attacked police for several hours. 17 officers were injured. Some needed to be treated in hospital.
It is absolutely vital that the PSNI are given the time they need to investigate the incidents concerned, rather than face mindless attacks as they seek to bring peace and order to keep people safe.
Police deployed a water cannon and fired baton rounds to try to disperse the mob. They arrested 5 people. The situation calmed down around 1 o'clock in the morning, but some fires remained alight until daybreak.
Well, looking around you, you can see that rioters have basically attacked police with anything they could get their hands on: bricks, bottles, even street bollards. Council workers are now starting the clean-up, doing their best to get the streets looking normal again as soon as possible, but it's a big job.
There's an increasing sense of fear amongst residents from a migrant background. Some people have put signs in their windows to indicate their nationalities in the hope this will prevent their homes from being attacked. The trouble in Ballymena began on Monday night. Hundreds attended a peaceful march protesting against the alleged attempted rape of a teenage girl at the weekend. 2 14-year-old boys were charged with that offence. In court, they spoke in Romanian through an interpreter, and their solicitor said they deny the charges. Police said a group broke away from the demonstration and some were intent on violence. The power-sharing devolved government has issued a statement. Ministers say those weaponising the situation in order to sow racial tensions don't care about seeing justice and have nothing to offer their communities but division and disorder. They go on, there can never be any justification for the violence that has taken place in recent days, during which residents have been terrorised and numerous police officers injured. The Police Service of Northern Ireland is asking other forces in the UK for backup in case the disturbances get worse. Chris Page, BBC News, Ballymena.
And in the past few minutes, we have received this update on the situation in Ballymena from the Police Service of Northern Ireland.
Last night we saw a second night of sustained rioting and disorder in Ballymena. Sadly, once again, we saw absolutely disgraceful scenes of violence on our streets. A number of other protests, attacks on homes and disorder took place in Belfast, Lisburn, Coleraine, Carrickfergus and Newtonabbey. We witnessed businesses and homes being attacked and damaged, along with cars set on fire. As a result, people are waking up today feeling genuine fear for their lives and their livelihoods. Police officers again came under sustained attack over a number of hours from petrol bombs, heavy masonry and had fireworks thrown at them. 32 officers have now been injured over the last 2 nights of rioting. And I want to say publicly my admiration for the bravery and professionalism of those officers that they showed when dealing with the challenges and the violence they had to face. Those officers come from our communities to work for our communities and to make a difference in our communities. They were doing that on Monday night, last night, and they will continue to do that for the days ahead. During the course of the disorder in Ballymena, after warnings were issued, authorised officers discharged 13 attenuating energy projectiles and a water cannon was deployed in an attempt to disperse the crowds. For the second day, the focus of this mob violence has been upon our diverse communities and the police. This has no place in any right-thinking and civilised society. Let me say in the clearest possible terms, this senseless violence is utterly unacceptable, and as I see it, serves only to endanger lives and destroy our local area, our local communities. And I want to appeal directly to those involved or considering becoming involved in the disorder to stop and think. Ask yourselves, is the hatred something you want to be associated with? Is this worth being prosecuted for? Is it worth your future being put under threat, or indeed the future of your children? Most importantly, please ask yourself, how are these criminal acts, how are they helping the ongoing criminal investigation in support of a young victim who deserves justice? This violence only serves to undermine the criminal investigation and cause further distress and turmoil to a young victim and her family. This violence threatens to derail the very pursuit of justice it claims to challenge. Our investigations into the criminals behind this disorder is ongoing, and we're resolute in our determination to bring those perpetrators to justice. As of this afternoon, 6 individuals have now been arrested for public order offences. 1 has been charged. All video and online footage is currently being reviewed, and I assure you that prosecutions will undoubtedly come. A significant policing operation will be in place in Ballymena and beyond over the coming days. We're taking steps to increase available resources and are surging a significant number of extra officers, vehicles and equipment to those areas where the rioting is taking place. This will have an impact on our communities. This will take away vital resources needed to police other areas. It will have an impact on our ability to serve communities. As part of my forward planning, therefore, I have now activated the request for mutual aid resources from policing colleagues in Great Britain to ensure we have the necessary support to maintain public order and bring offenders to justice in the days to come. I'm appealing for calm over the coming days and again urge anyone considering becoming involved in violence and disorder to think long and hard, to think about the repercussions for themselves and their community. And to those who may wish to protest and have their voice heard this evening or indeed in the days ahead, please do so peacefully and lawfully. But be aware that, as we have seen in Ballymena, others may use your peaceful intention as a cover for their own violent agenda. To those who have been affected by the violence and are feeling fear and intimidation, I want you to know that we stand with you. The Police Service of Northern Ireland stands with you. We're here to help and support you in any way that we can. Finally, I appeal to everyone across our communities in Northern Ireland to continue to publicly and loudly condemn this criminal behaviour on our streets. Stand with us in saying that it is not okay and it must stop. These criminals should not be louder than us. We cannot allow hatred and mindless violence to win. Please join me in condemning these criminal acts and support those communities under attack and the men and women of the Police Service of Northern Ireland who come to work every day to make a positive difference in our communities. Thank you. You will have seen over the coming nights we have resourced and surged more and more police officers onto the streets. Tonight we have a significant operation in place. You will have seen last night that our full range of tactics, including the use of water cannon, AEP, we were making arrests on the streets, all to try and reduce the threat to communities and the threats to our officers. Clearly this takes its toll. A significant number of officers have been injured over the past days. I want to put on record my thanks for the well wishes that I have been getting from across our communities for the safety and good health of my colleagues. That is really appreciated. We will be supporting them and are supporting them as they recover from the injuries that they have, to make sure that they are back in the streets of Northern Ireland making a difference.
Sometimes it can be argued that it can spill over because the police are there. So how are you balancing that, please?
We have seen a number of calls over social media for protest activity this evening at various places within Northern Ireland. It can be difficult at times to make a really strong assessment as to how much that will be and where exactly that will be, but we saw some of that last night. Our job as the police is to facilitate peaceful protest. people have an absolute right to have a voice, and I know there are significant concerns that are being expressed from communities. And last night, indeed, we saw protests that were peaceful. They engaged with police and they made their point, but did so in a peaceful manner. Sadly, there were other protests that connected to them, and following them we saw significant violence. I want to make it very clear, when I have spoken loudly about the racist thuggery in our streets, that is not to say that I am labelling communities as racist, but when I watch families having their doors kicked in who happen to be from our diverse communities, I have to call that out for the racist behaviour that it is. We will balance, and this is something that we do here in the Police Service of Northern Ireland and have done for years, people's absolute right to protest peacefully and have their voice heard, whilst at the same time being equipped and ready to react to crime and criminality in our streets.
And we can't really hear the questions here, but just a reminder that this is Assistant Chief Constable Ryan Henderson of the Police Service of Northern Ireland answering questions and giving an update on the situation with regards to the violence and disturbances in Ballymena.
Around the motivation for the violence and is there coordination behind it. It is absolutely of note that both last night and the night before, the fact that petrol bombs and masonry were thrown at police would say that there were people who were intent on violence right from the off. So that says to me that there is pre-planning involved from those that want to attack us. You will see the power of social media connecting different parts of Northern Ireland in terms of the desire to protest, but also the desire to be violent and how that has been done. And we have seen that in a number of sites over the past couple of days. That is galvanising, I think, some of this support and some of the violent behaviour. And again, I would appeal to right-minded people not to allow themselves to be involved or dragged into it, because if you're a young person and you are in the criminal justice system, it has consequences for you, and I do not want our young people involved in that. And the question, no doubt, is whether there's paramilitary involvement in this. At this point, it's not clear to us through intelligence or what we're hearing that there's paramilitary coordination to it. But I want to be very clear that if that does come out from our investigations, I'll not be slow or shy in attributing blame to those who are involved.
What about far-right groups, and are you expecting the violence to spread?
As I said, last night we saw significant violence. We also saw peaceful protest. My nearly 30 years in policing makes me absolutely alert to the fact we could see more tonight, and that's why we're preparing and planned for that. But I don't want the communities of Northern Ireland to feel unsafe, nor do I want them to feel that I am saying that we will definitely see this tonight. I'm preparing for it. I'm prepared that it might happen, but at this stage it's too early to judge just the extent of that.
Ryan, Julian O'Neill, BBC. Just to elaborate on Brendan's point, who is actually coming out onto the streets? Are they from outside the locality? Where are they coming from? We saw last summer when there was this kind of violence, people were coming from the Irish Republic, for example. Is there any evidence that people are coming far and wide to these protest violent incidents? And following on from that, in respect of mutual aid, can you give us an indication of how many officers you think you might need and when you might get them?
Last night, and I have been able over the course of the week to see firsthand just who was on the streets and who has been involved in violence, and anyone who has watched it on social media will see there are a lot of young people who are intent on violence on the police and actually violence on others in the community. We are seeing that is in the main people from that local area, and that in itself is telling in that the damage and the violence and destruction is happening in their local area. And again, I would appeal for any who have influence to be able to help take those young people away from that area. That's not to say that I don't think people are travelling to it as well. Of course, I do think that is a factor, given that, as I say, through social media, often these events are advertised and people will travel to it. But at this early stages, most of what we are seeing is driven by people locally.
And on the mutual aid question?
In terms of mutual aid, I have activated requests to mutual aid from colleagues in Great Britain. You will recall that last summer during the disorder we called in mutual aid. That was in the region of around 80 officers from in Police Scotland in the main and elsewhere. That is to allow some degree of rest and support to our own staff who will be very much be at the front line of this over the coming days. That I think is really adequate for us to help give us that support. They will be well supported by our own colleagues who will be with them. And again, I want to reassure you and the public that those officers that come will have been trained by Police Service of Northern Ireland officers to be able to work in the environment that they're coming to here in Northern Ireland.
And that is Assistant Chief Constable Ryan Henderson from the Police Service of Northern Ireland giving reporters an update on the situation in Ballymena, where over the last 2 nights there has been violence. He described the diverse communities of Ballymena and police as the focus of mob violence over the last couple of nights. The protest sparked by an alleged assault on a teenage girl. Let's go to our Ireland correspondent Chris Page, who's in Ballymena, keeping a watch on all the developments there for us. And Chris, we heard from the police officer there, I guess, hoping for the best, appealing to people to be calm, but also preparing potentially for more trouble.
Yes, Assistant Chief Constable Ryan Henderson there painted really quite a stark picture of what had happened over the last 2 days, Anita. And he made the point that while he wasn't predicting violence tonight, he said he didn't want any communities to feel unsafe. He knew from his experience in policing and the pattern of events here in Ballymena and in a few other parts of County Antrim last night, well, violence is certainly possible. And he was trying to assure as many people as possible that the police are equipped to deal with that if indeed there is more trouble. In the last few minutes, actually the Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland, Emma Little-Pengelly of the Democratic Unionist Party, has just arrived here in the part of the town where the violence has been at its most serious. She's currently just down the street talking to a group of local people. She is the joint head of the power sharing devolved government here, and earlier today she stood beside the First Minister, her main power sharing partner, Michelle O'Neill of the Irish Nationalist Party, Sinn Féin, really I suppose presenting a united front. Ms O'Neill said that the violence was abhorrent and racism pure and simple, and Ms Little-Pengelly said that violence was always unacceptable. So certainly the message has gone out from politicians, from the police, as you've been hearing there in that news conference, also from other community leaders. And we have throughout the course of today and yesterday been speaking to families, many of them from a migrant background who live in this area, who've been telling us how worried they've been about the violence. We've seen more families having to leave their homes today, packing up their bags into the boots of their cars, feeling very much, of course, that they have been under attack, deliberately targeted over the last couple of days. Again, behind me you will see some houses that have had their doors and windows boarded up because they've had them smashed in. Also, some houses have been set on fire. So there's no doubting the seriousness of the situation. More than 30 police officers injured over these last 2 nights, 5 people arrested so far, and certainly there is still a sense and a worry amongst people here that the worst of this might not be over.
Chris, very briefly, if you would, we heard from the Assistant Chief Constable. He said that he had seen calls on social media for more protests. Just tell us a little bit more briefly about the mood there and concerns.
Yes, the Assistant Chief Constable referred to a number of protests that have been put on social media, as it were, for tonight, and he said the police will always support peaceful protesters, but he warned that there could be people who would aim to use the cover, if you like, of peaceful protests for their violent intent. So again, it's a warning, and essentially I think the senior police officers and indeed people not least here in these areas most affected, hoping for the best but preparing for the worst also.
OK, Chris, thank you very much. Our Ireland correspondent Chris Page in Ballymena. We'll be back after this short break. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
Be ready. Change can happen in an instant. Check on the BBC Weather app.
A minute's silence has been observed earlier today in Austria following the school gun attack in Graz. A lone gunman shot dead 10 people before killing himself. Earlier, police said he left a farewell letter and what they described as a non-functioning pipe bomb at his home before carrying out the attack. The incident is the deadliest gun attack in the country's recent history, and Austria has declared 3 days of national mourning. Bethany Bell reports.
A minute of mourning across Austria. Church bells rang out for the victims of the school shooting in Graz, the worst gun attack in this country's recent history. It happened yesterday at this school during morning classes. Gunshots broke out. A 21-year-old Austrian man, armed with 2 weapons, moved through the school, shooting as he went. The suspect, who's believed to have acted alone, killed himself in a school bathroom. Outside the school today, people gathered to remember the dead and the injured. There's grief and tears.
It's a surreal situation, and all of us are not quite sure how to deal with it.
Marie-Christine's 16-year-old daughter goes to the school. She survived the attack.
So far, she is very composed, but I think she is still in shock. I think it would be important that more children are led in violence prevention, communication that has not happened so far.
Ilse told us she heard the gunshots.
Ich wohne hier und habe das vom ersten Schuss weg mitgehört.
I live here and heard the first shot and experienced it unfold, listening as the children cried.
The Red Cross has put up this screen to allow people a moment of private grief. There's a real sense of sadness and shock here. People are still struggling to understand how such an attack is possible in this country.
Volunteers from the emergency services remain in place near the school to help the grieving.
Es ist auf jeden Fall wichtig, ein gut geschultes Team haben, auf was man sich verlassen kann.
It's important to have a good team that you can rely on. All of my colleagues in this team are educated in finding the right things to say, even when there aren't the right words.
A debate has begun about whether Austria's gun laws need to be tightened. But for the mourners here, that has come too late.
Bethany Bell with that report. The United Nations says that there are nearly 138 million children working worldwide. UNICEF and the International Labour Organization released a joint report which said that despite progress, a deadline to end child labour by 2025 had been missed. They said that nearly 40% of the children aged from 5 to 17 were risking their health working in mines, factories or fields. At the current rate, they said, it would take hundreds of years to be rid of child labour. President Donald Trump says the US deal with China is done, with Beijing to supply magnets and rare earth minerals, while the US will allow Chinese students in its colleges and universities. On Truth Social, he said, "We are getting a total of 55% tariffs. China is getting 10%. Relationship is excellent." Our business correspondent Michelle Fleury has more from New York.
So I think there'd been a lot of sort of question marks about what was going to come out of these talks. Then you started to hear that they were going well, that there was a framework in place. Donald Trump seeming to confirm all of that, basically just posting on his social media channel that there is a deal with China done. He says it is still subject to approval by himself and also Xi Jinping of China. He says that we will get full magnets and any necessary rare earths will be supplied up front by China. And he says in return, China will also be able to send its students to United States colleges and universities. There is also some talk about tariffs, the tariff rate that may be in place. But again, we're still waiting for the final actual details. And I think that's important to remember, that this is really just confirming that there is a framework in place, that there has been progress made, but the fine print is really what everyone wants to see. One of the key sticking points, Lucy, had been this idea about export controls over rare earths from China. These are crucial metals that are essential to so much of modern-day manufacturing and also defence. For example, there had been reports that car companies were having difficulties getting the magnets they need for electric vehicles. There was a case where Ford had to temporarily shut down manufacturing because they were kind of short on supplies. So it does appear that there has been progress made on that front.
Michelle Fleury. South Korea has suspended loudspeaker broadcasts into North Korea, which have been playing along the border since last July. The new president, Lee Jae-myung, wants to improve bilateral ties and had promised to stop them. But organisations advocating for human rights for North Koreans have criticised his move. The North is for now continuing its own border transmissions, which are part of a campaign that also saw Pyongyang fly hundreds of balloons carrying sacks of rubbish and excrement south. Now, after their bitter social media fallout, the Tesla boss Elon Musk has apologised for posts he made about Donald Trump. Writing on his platform X, Elon Musk says, "I regret some of my posts about President Donald Trump last week. They went too far." The backdrop here is the bitter war of words that culminated in the tech billionaire suggesting, without evidence, that President Trump appears in unreleased files related to the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. It started with Musk criticising President Trump's spending bill over concerns it would increase the US deficit. Mr. Trump addressed the criticism in the Oval Office during a visit by German Chancellor Friedrich Merz.
But I'm very disappointed because Elon knew the inner workings of this bill better than almost anybody sitting here, better than you people. He knew everything about it. He had no problem with it. All of a sudden he had a problem. And he only developed the problem when he found out that we're going to have to cut the EV mandate, because that's billions and billions of dollars. But I'm very disappointed in Elon. I've helped Elon a lot.
Well, Elon Musk's criticism of the president soon became more personal, with him taking aim at the election result. He wrote on X, "Without me, Trump would have lost the election. Dems would control the House and the Republicans would be 51-49 in the Senate." Even as the feud escalated, Elon Musk's father, Errol Musk, said he thought it was possible to mend their relationship.
I think they're rethinking everything now and things will come back to order, you know. Right?
What have you advised your son to do in terms of his relationship with President Trump?
Restore the relationship.
Excuse me. Do you think,
yes.
Is that possible to?
Yes, why not?
Now, some breaking news on the protests that have been happening in LA. The US military has been speaking, saying that Marines near the city will be receiving training on how to handle civil disturbances. More on that coming up. Now, let me just pick up on that story relating to LA, because the overnight curfew, which has been in force in Los Angeles since 8 p.m. local time on Tuesday, has ended. Police had issued dispersal orders and say they made mass arrests after 5 successive days of protests. President Trump deployed the National Guard as well as Marines, despite opposition from California's governor and officials in Los Angeles, although the Marines are in a staging area, not on the streets of the city yet. The White House says the extra force was needed to protect border control agents as they carried out immigration raids. CBS News correspondent Jared Hill, who's in New York, told us more about the situation right across the country.
Lucy, we've seen these demonstrations happening in New York, in Chicago, as well as parts of Texas, Washington, D.C., California, obviously multiple of those. Here in New York yesterday, there were hundreds of people, if not somewhere close to 1,000, who were protesting really in one particular part of the city. I think that that's one of the things that's important to keep in mind here with all of these protests that we're seeing, is that largely they are pretty isolated to specific parts of these cities. There were a couple of dozen arrests yesterday yesterday here in New York, mostly related to things like disorderly conduct. There is another protest scheduled for today here in New York as well. One of the big questions, obviously, is going to be how long does this last? How much do we continue to see these protests around this specific issue? There have obviously been constant protests ever since President Trump took office, and this is the latest powder keg.
And let's just tell you a little bit more about that news we've heard in the last few minutes from Major General Scott Sherman, who is leading the deployment of nearly 5,000 troops to California. He's been speaking about the activation and deployment of Marines to Los Angeles. He says the National Guard are only there to help law enforcement carry out their duties.
We have 1,000 that have done operations so far. That is both the protection of the installations or the federal buildings, and then also protection of federal law enforcement as they conduct their mission. On Title 10, on federal orders, these soldiers do not conduct law enforcement operations, like arrests or search and seizure. They are strictly used for the protection of the federal personnel as they conduct their operations and to protect them, to allow them to do their federal mission.
The European Space Agency has released never-before-seen images of the Sun. The ESA's Solar Orbiter spacecraft has sent back the first pictures of the solar South Pole. The new images are important because they'll enable scientists to get a better picture of why the Sun's poles switch from north to south and back again every 11 years, and how this affects life on Earth. Here's Palab Ghosh.
A view of the Sun that's never been seen before. Its South Pole. The shimmering bright atmosphere is its hottest part at 1,000,000 degrees Celsius. The darker, lofted clouds are cooler wisps of gas, but still at a searing several thousand degrees. The pictures have been taken by the European Space Agency's Solar Orbiter spacecraft. They're the closest and most detailed ever taken, and they'll help scientists learn how the star that gives us life on Earth actually works.
So this is humanity's first ever glimpse of the poles of the Sun. And this is really important because the Sun's magnetic field has an 11-year cycle where it starts off at north-south and then flips to south-north. And to really understand this cycle, what we've been missing and what we're going to get now is images of the magnetic field at the poles of the Sun.
From Earth, the Sun seems like a bright, featureless disk. But at certain frequencies, space telescopes can reveal its detailed structure, how magnetic fields twist and turn on its surface to create solar flares and loops of gas. No one really knows how these magnetic fields work because scientists are unable to see how they move and shift on the north and south poles. But now they can.
If you see these radial structures, that's what you'll see more at the poles.
It's these magnetic fields that determine when the Sun rages and spits out particles towards the Earth. This space weather can damage communication satellites and power grids and cause beautiful auroras.
The reversal of the polar magnetic fields on the Sun is, for me, I think, one of the big open questions in science. And what we'll be able to do with Solar Orbiter is measure for the first time really important fluid flows that grab pieces of the magnetic field of the Sun and transport them to the polar regions.
The new research will help scientists learn more about our closest star and predict its raging moods. Palab Ghosh, BBC News.
Amazing images. Do stay with us here on BBC News. Much more to come.
Hello there. Warm and humid is the forecast for the next few days for all areas, but particularly so for England and Wales. But this combination of heat and humidity is likely to set off some heavy and thundery downpours, which will be pushing up from the south. Now, we've got high pressure over the near continent drawing this warm and humid air from France, and low pressure and weather fronts out in the Atlantic trying to make inroads and destabilising the atmosphere. So tonight most places will be dry, warm and muggy. We'll start to see some heavy showers and thunderstorms pushing up across the Channel Islands into southwest England and South Wales. Some of these could be heavy, risk of some localised flooding. Double figure values for all. So we start Thursday off on a warm and humid note. We'll have showers and thunderstorms from the word go across southwest England. He's pushing into Wales, Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland as we head into the afternoon. And again, some of them could be heavy with the risk of some localised flooding. But elsewhere, it stays dry and sunny with some variable cloud. Top temperatures again around the mid-20s and feeling humid. Friday, probably the peak of the heat, especially the southeast of England. We'll see some sunshine here, scattered thundery downpours developing pretty widely, spreading their way northwards through the course of the day. Top temperatures, high 20s in the southeast. We could hit the 30 Celsius mark, low 20s further north and west. But as we head into the weekend, the Atlantic winds out, it turns cooler and fresher with temperatures returning closer to the seasonal norm. Showers in the north, sunnier in the south.
Drone strikes in Ukraine and Russia, prisoner exchanges and occasional rounds of negotiation, but still no sign of a ceasefire. Donald Trump said he could end this conflict, but he hasn't yet. For more on the war in Ukraine, join me, Paul Adams, here on BBC News.
Factories across China are rushing to make and ship their goods to the United States after a ceasefire was agreed between Beijing and Washington in their economic war. But how long will it last? Join me, Laura Bicker, as we gauge reaction across China for BBC News.
National Public Radio, NPR, is one of the most recognised names in US media, but President Trump accuses it of having a liberal bias. We've been speaking to the boss of NPR, who's planning a fight back against moves to cut its federal funding. That's all coming up on The Media Show on BBC News.
Live from London, this is BBC News. The UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves speaks to the BBC after setting out her new plan for spending, with a promise to invest in security, health and growing the economy.
And I'm Regina Vaidyanathan, live in Westminster with all of the political reaction. We'll be taking a look at who the winners and losers are in today's Spending Review.
2 nights of violence, 32 officers injured and 6 people arrested. Police in Northern Ireland call for peace in Ballymena.
For the second day, the focus of this mob violence has been upon our diverse communities and the police. This has no place in any right-thinking and civilised society.
US Marines take civil disturbance training ahead of their deployment on the streets of Los Angeles, where there's been unrest over President Trump's immigration crackdown. And the EU and UK agree a deal on the post-Brexit status of Gibraltar. Hello, I'm Anita McVeigh and you are watching Verified Live. It's a hugely significant day here in the UK because the Chancellor has been setting out how taxpayers' money will be spent by the government until the end of the decade. We're going to have lots of analysis for you, so let's cross straight to my colleague, Regina Vaidyanathan, who's in Westminster for us. Regina.
Thank you very much, Anita. Well, this, as you say, is a hugely significant day, not just politically, and we'll get into that in a moment, but also for people up and down the UK, because the Chancellor has set out which which government departments are going to get a spending boost and which departments might not get as much as they had hoped for. To be clear, this wasn't a fiscal event, as they say, so there were no announcements on taxes. This was all about distributing the money that's already there. Now, the Chancellor confirmed that total departmental spending will grow by 2.3% over inflation per year. Well, she says the spending on the NHS will rise by 3% a year after inflation, and confirmed £39 billion for social and affordable housing. Rachel Reeves also committed to a boost in defence spending, something we'd heard about in recent weeks. She also talked about wanting to end funding for asylum hotels in the next 4 years. Well, as we were saying, there were winners and losers. Some departments didn't do as well as they might have hoped, including the Home Office, for example, and the Foreign Office. Well, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, said she is rejecting austerity. With more, here's our political correspondent, Leila Nathu.
When will we feel better off, Chancellor?
Soon, fingers crossed, is what she's thinking. Rachel Reeves leaving Downing Street this morning for Parliament for a crucial moment in her time in charge of the country's finances. Earlier, cabinet ministers met to hear how much money their departments have been allocated for the coming years, both for spending and investment. Some have done better than others. Trade-offs unavoidable with limited room for manoeuvre in economic terms.
I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves.
In the Commons this lunchtime, the Chancellor set out her stall.
We are renewing Britain. But I know that too many people in too many parts of our country are yet to feel it. This government's task, my task as Chancellor, and the purpose of this spending review is to change that, to ensure that renewal is felt in people's everyday lives, in their jobs and on their high streets. The priorities of this spending review are the priorities of working people.
She's giving day-to-day spending across all departments an above-inflation boost and said she was taking a different approach to that of the Tories.
In contrast to our increase of 2.3%, they cut spending by 2.9% per year in 2010. So let's be clear. Austerity was a destructive choice for the fabric of our society.
There are cuts to some departments, including Transport and the Foreign Office, but schools and defence have been given an uplift, and the NHS was the big winner.
This Labour government is making a record cash investment in our National Health Service, increasing real terms day-to-day spending by 3% per year for every single year of this spending review. An extra